This is the Urban Binge Radio. Sunday Flow.
Anyway, let's get into some more hot topics or some more facts. Fun fact number 4. Dr. King's best friend, Ralph Abernathy, and many of you have heard of him, wrote a tell-all book after Dr. King's death, detailing King's infidelity, calling it the unfaithful king, or the unrighteous king, or something like that. Something he named it. And Coretta Scott King was saying, scandal sells. She says scandal sells books. Fidelity does not. And she said, my husband was no saint, she contended, but his faults were confined to things like stepping out of his pajamas and leaving them on the floor. Those were his faults, you see. So she really went to bat for Dr. King, no matter what Ralph Abernathy wrote in his book. And that's so unfortunate that Ralph Abernathy felt the need, or so broke that he needed money to go so low as to write a tell-all book on his best friend, Dr. Martin Luther King. That's crazy. Anyway, Ralph Abernathy's tell-all book. I think I said as much as I can say about that. It was just really crazy because I believe he even, Ralph Abernathy in his book, you guys have to go look this book up, Ralph Abernathy's tell-all book on Dr. King. You'll read everything you have to see. He talks about how Dr. King even slept with women the night he was killed. So in 1968, when he was shot dead, he was dealing with the women in the hotels. So he would purposely stay at these hotels where he had already met women, and women that he knew were working at these hotels. He would stay at these hotels, to meet up with them, and cheating on his wife. So constantly being on the road, but getting new puss here and there, you know what I'm saying? Which is very hurtful. And that's why I think Bernice King is so the way she is now, because she's been so sheltered being the baby that she didn't get the real deal news until after her mom died. And that's so unfortunate that she's been shelter brained for so long that she didn't get the raw, real news until after her mother's passing, that your father cheated, the FBI recorded it intentionally to spite him and to spite his wife, and send it to her in hopes that she would be pissed off and turn on him and spite him back. And she did not spite him back. And that's amazing. But Ralph Abernathy is like Judas, it's like Judas. He just completely turned on this man for a little piece of change. And I would say go buy the book, because it's still a piece of history, and it's a good read. It's some good tea from a man who walked right next to Jesus. See, not Jesus, but Dr. King, kind of sort of right next to him. So, it's a good buy. And of course, it will support the Abernathy family if they need any support. I'm pretty sure any money that's, that people use, any money for that book, it goes to the family. So you should go read it, or just read excerpts from it on the internet, and you can see where Abernathy talks about Dr. King slapping a woman at the hotel before he was killed, and was actually dealing with 2 women. One of those women have come out and done an interview before and discussed her relationship with Dr. King, and discussed knowing he was married, but not being able to ward off the fact that this was Dr. King. First of all, he was handsome. Second of all, he was of a certain caliber in the Black community. So me having sex with Dr. King is a plus for me. So she thought, because she's nowhere today and still was at the hotel cleaning up, and Coretta was number 1. So you see,
believe that the FBI had something to do with that conspiracy. It seems to me that the surveillance that my husband underwent as he traveled around the world by the FBI, and the things that have already been revealed that are on record, point toward the FBI having certainly known what was happening. And if there was some conspiracy there, that they should have known who the people were that were involved, because he was under constant surveillance. And I cannot believe that they would not have known about all the plots and all the people and where they were at various times.
Anyway, fun fact number 5 is that, did you know Allegedly, the FBI back then recorded Dr. King cheating on his wife and mailed it to her to listen to it and or watch it. And Coretta Scott King never believed it. She did an interview and she had many excuses. I have to admit that she had a really good, compelling rebuttal that would make you say, wow, she loves him. Like, no matter what anybody says this man did, she's going to stand by her man. And what I have to say to him, I'm going to say to him in private and not in front of everybody. And that is Coretta Scott King. So so another thing I wanted to talk about, speaking of, Coretta's whole outlook on the scandal, she's like, look, sex sells, scandal sells, but the truth and fidelity does not. So that's all I have to say about Abernathy's book. And that's probably pretty hurtful. She straight up came out with it at one of the interviews saying, what a lot of people want to know is how I feel about the infidelity. I don't feel about it. I love him and I stand by my man. So that was Coretta Scott King's whole position of it, which, a lot of high-class women in relationships of higher calibers typically take that route, especially political relationships. They may not want to be considered political, but in some way they are. A political relationship. Dr. King and Miss Coretta Scott King. So it's not unusual that they would say, I'm not some Tammy Wynette standing by my man.
I think most Americans would agree that it's very admirable that you have stayed together, that you've worked your problems out, that you seem to have reached some sort of an understanding and an arrangement.
Wait a minute.
But
Wait a minute. You're looking at two people who love each other. This is not an arrangement or an understanding. This is a marriage. That's a very different thing.
I'm not sitting here as some little woman standing by my man like Tammy Wynette.
Yes, the hell you are, because you stood by him. Anyway, Dr. King family and Dr. King had trust issues. Like I said before, towards the end of his death, you could see his neck become on a swivel and his eyes become like our eyes. They were looking everywhere as if he knew the dark spirit was coming towards him, or like a Judas was around him, somebody who he can't really trust. I don't know who it is, but somebody who I can't trust. Somebody giving the FBI tips, telling them where I'm going to be, when I'm going to be, how I'm standing, where I'm standing, how I'm talking, where I'm talking, how I'm moving, every movement that I make. And so he probably was feeling that heavy on himself and just had to completely, rid himself of it and go out on the porch and say, you know what, give it to me. What? Whoever got it coming, come on.
What you're fixing to witness now is the man who came by to get King to take him to dinner. And 30 years later at a press conference, he slipped, because God do baffle your mind sometimes.
We will revisit the mountaintop speech site. That's the Mason's Temple, where Dr. King made his last address, which he almost didn't make, because the night that we were having that rally, there were tornado warnings, and he was behind on the Poor People's Campaign. And he said, you guys go on over and have the rally. I want to stay at the motel and work on the Poor People's Campaign. When we got there and Dr. Abernathy walked in and Jesse Jackson walked in and I walked in and others, people started clapping because they thought Martin was behind us. And so Ralph's preacher said to him, this is not our crowd. And he went to the phone and called Dr. King. And any of the marches that we had in those days, you have an opportunity to bring the children and bring the family and march with us. And when I finished sharing with them the last hour of Dr. King's life, no hurry, but that gave me the wonderful privilege of spending the last hour on earth. 3 preachers in a room, Abernathy, King, and Kyle. And we spent that last hour together in room 306 at the Lorraine Motel. The press is always curious, and writers, what went on? What did you talk about? I say, we just talk preacher talk. What preachers talk about when they get together.
Y'all pay real attention to what you're fixing to hear now.
About 5:45, we walked on the balcony, and he was talking to people in the courtyard. He stood here and I stood there. Only as I moved away, so we could have a clear shot, the shot rang out.
Thank you.
I turned around and then stood back on the balcony.
Listen. Oh. Wait, listen. Listen. 30 years later, this brother never realized he would slip and say that.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like when he stepped out on the porch. Like he knew something was coming. Not only that, it was so many people knew he was going to that hotel to stay. It shouldn't have been that way. He should have had security. Nobody should have known he was going to that hotel to stay. And how you know they knew is because when he arrived, it was people all outside cheering him on. So they knew he was going to be there. They were cheering him on like a celebrity. And he knew that someone in his camp, someone very close to him, was drenched in a dark Judas spirit. You know, I say dark Judas spirit because Judas wasn't, fully dark. He was like half and half. He had some issues, but he loved Lord. He loved Jesus. He loved his friend. But he was having him. Anyway.
Impact. I wound up being the last judge hearing the James Earl Ray matter. Did he in fact assassinate Dr. Martin Luther King? And had he not died and his local attorney not died in close succession, it would have been my finding that he was not the gunman. That Remington 760 Game Master they've got in the Civil Rights Museum is not the murder weapon. It's not even close. And it was a two-man hit team that killed him from the fire station dormitory. It wasn't the flop house and it wasn't in those bushes. So yeah, I got into the deep details of Dr. King, and that 3 or 4 year period that case was kicking around in front of me.
So you're saying that the James Earl Ray did not kill Martin Luther King?
Yeah.
Even though most people, well, he was convicted,
didn't kill him,
right?
He didn't kill him. It's interesting, the homicide file for the Memphis Police Department reaches the same conclusion back in 1968. They entered their file in protest to the DA's office. Their conclusion was Ray is not the gunman. He was not even in Memphis that day. We know conclusively where he was.
So why do you think he got convicted for the murder?
Well, he didn't get convicted. He pled guilty. You have to understand, though, the news media puts it out as he was the self-confessed killer of King. That's not true. All through the transcripts, the entirety of the record, he never confessed, and often he said, I never said I killed King. I didn't kill him. I'm pleading cause of Alford. That's A-L-F-O-R-D. It's a moderately old U.S. Supreme Court case, and it says, even if you are not actually guilty and you are pristinely innocent, you may plead guilty to the charge if you think that doing so is in your best interest under all of the circumstances as you know them to be, and you're doing so freely, voluntarily, understandingly, knowingly, advisedly, and intelligently. So Ray had gone through all of these and had lost, but there was something that came up. Modern scientific methodology took away one further necessary element. All of these things had to be there, and the state had to have a reasonable factual basis upon which to proceed otherwise. The thing the state relied upon was the rifle, but modern scientific methodology excluded that rifle from being the murder weapon. The bullet they pull out of King's body has a rate of rifling twist of 1 turn in every 11 1/4 inches. The rifle that Ray had a rate of rifling twist of 1 turn in every 10 inches and a bad manufacturing defect that is not apparent on the death slug. He was shot with an XM21. It's a 7.62 by 51 millimeter NATO caliber weapon with a special stainless steel barrel, a 3-9 telescopic sight modified by a company known as Leatherwood. It was a Redfield sight, and they used special subsonic ammunition with a suppressor on the end to reduce the velocity of the bullet to below supersonic to confuse the sound signature. The shot came from the dormitory in the fire station through a window that had been slightly parted. They were several feet inside. It was a 2-man team, a spotter and a shooter. That's what he got killed by. If you shoot somebody at that closer range, which was about 50, 60 yards, with a 30 caliber rifle anywhere in the torso, if the individual is standing next to an emergency room, it's a non-survivable wound. But what they did is they took a headshot they almost missed because the bullet was reduced in velocity. It hit King on the right cheek, took out some molars, wrecked his tongue, came out between his jaws, left the body, hit his clavicle, ricocheted under the skin that covered the clavicle, nicked his carotid artery, went over his right shoulder, down across the back and lodged between the left scapula and his back skin. And the bullet never penetrated his thorax. Now that sounds a little weird, but it's not uncommon. So he bled out from the nicked carotid artery and they almost missed the shot. And Reid was nowhere around.
So had he lived, you would have actually found James Earl Reid not guilty and released him from prison?
Well, he would have been close. He had another involvement in this whole thing, and that was that he was a willing part of what amounted to a conspiracy. He was one of about 4 or 5 alternative scapegoats, and they picked him for a number of reasons. I did talk to a Captain Tommy Smith, who retired as head of homicide for the Memphis Police Department, who was the first detective on the scene. He said the shot couldn't have been from the flop house because there was a window that he was supposed to fire the shot out of, and who told me that I never found out. He said, but there was a limb about this thick growing diagonally through the window, and you couldn't even see the Lorraine Motel from that location. He said, I came back with crime scene in about an hour, and the whole tree had been cut down, and I found out there was a cut down order sent out to the sanitation department early that day, but they were on strike, so they weren't going to cut it down. So
coming up next, everybody, is the praise mix, what everybody comes to the show about, what everybody loves the show about. Every time I post a show, everybody hit us up and say they like the praise mix, the praise mix. Can we keep the praise mix? Can we make the praise mix a little longer? This praise mix is going to be a little longer. I added a couple of more songs in there, so the DJ going to let it rip a little longer. And let's get into these jams. This is the Sunday Flow Show right here on the Urban Binge Radio. Sunday Flow Show right here on the Urban Binge Radio. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back to talk more hot topics and more jamming gospel music. I'll be right back. I'm your boy, Rico Bellucci.
The Urban Binge Radio Podcast,
where we discuss viral topics, hot jams, new artists, fun, and informative interviews and conversations. This is your news stop for the hottest trend in urban culture news. 2 shows, 1 podcast, The Urban Binge Show and Sunday Flow Show, powered by The Urban Binge.
the Urban Binge Radio Podcast. Listen anywhere podcast can be heard.
Haters like, am I going to hell for the things that I could wear? I ain't gonna hide my blessings when I know